Alright, good morning guys. So what we're going to work on today is kind of working with photo references in order to recreate some textures. And so yesterday I put together, and there's going to be two series for this using the same kind of photos. One is going to be based off of just drawing, and the second one, part of this one, is going to be using watercolor. And so the big thing that you want to focus on, and again, these are royalty-free images that I've put together in some PowerPoints for my students. But so the big thing that I want them to focus on is like mimicking the lights and shadows, or lights and darks, highlights and shadows, to kind of really get a feel of what makes this type of fabric different from this type. I'm not having them per se go in and like map out every single one of these little dots or the pattern texture here. I want them more to focus on the like broad overlay, although they're you're more than welcome to go in and add that detail if you so choose. But so we are going to start with fabric, but so there's a ton of different textures down through here. But so starting with fabric, again, I think I said it, these are all royalty-free images that I gathered from Unsplash and Pixabay and kind of zoomed in really far to kind of capture like an interesting or good use of interesting section of detail, or a like really good area that captures like lights and darks. But so for similar to the drawing section here, we're going to focus on this image currently. So this is regular drawing paper versus this is watercolor paper. So I do want you to kind of make a fairly decent sample size of these. It doesn't have to be precise or perfect, or you can kind of just make a space on your paper. However, for me it was kind of easier to just go ahead and cut out a 3x3 square, and I just kind of laid it down across the paper and traced it. So these aren't like all lined up or really specific. But so I just wanted to make sure they were all kind of roughly the same size. And since the reference images are already cropped to nice, neat squares, I thought that would be a good fit. Okay. But so I'm going to lay this here. Well, actually, I'm going to, I figured out how to digitally lay an image on the screen here using Premiere, so that worked pretty well. So I'll probably do the same thing for this whole kind of series. But so I'm going to set my watercolors up here next to my water. So to start out with specifically doing watercolor, you're not going to per se be drawing and shading like we did for the drawing example. But so you kind of more or less want to sketch out and block out your areas, and then we'll go back in with color. So again, this is more about kind of focusing on like painting what you see and really using a reference image so that you can work with more detailed designs. So to start out with, I'm just kind of going to take my pencil and just kind of sketch. And I thought that first line was a little high, so we'll go back in with that. And I have an eraser here. And then so this line kind of extends out. There is a harsh shadow kind of line here. There's a curve. This kind of fans out and has a light area. And then it fans out some more because this area is super dark. there's a highlight here. Now on the drawing, I did go in and kind of, actually I should lay this here while I do this. But so I went in and kind of recreated these and kind of blocked it out. So on the drawing version, I did add these. I think I'll go ahead and do it here as well. Again, these don't have to be perfect. I think, let me go ahead and count them again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So there's 13 stitches. And the good thing about stitches, per se, when you're dealing with fabric and sewing, generally your stitches are all like they're machined, so they're uniform, so they're all going to be the same size. But on the drawing one, I think I only ended up with 11. So again, I'm not super particular in getting it absolutely perfect, but so we'll see how many we end up with this time. So 2, 3, 4, actually, I don't like how that, I didn't start the curve early enough. So I think we're still going to end up about 10 or 11, which again is fine because it'll still get the basic gist of what we're going for and kind of tracing or recreating this example of fabric. So one thing that pencil will do, and why you don't really want to shade, is it will really kind of muddy your watercolor super easy. So you don't want to add too much detail unless you're like purposefully going for like an outline look. If you're wanting it to be super natural and realistic and kind of blend, you can either go through and erase your pencil kind of as you're working with it, or kind of leave it super light so that you can blend it in with the paint and it not be too overwhelming. Right, so I'm just finishing kind of copying some of the folds and slight shadows in this. So down here, like, so basically I've created like just a simple line art of this and kind of blocked out those shadows and stuff. And I do want to add kind of one going there. But so, or you could even leave it simpler than this and go through and just kind of create those differentiations with just your watercolor and not really block in those shadows. But it does make it easier if you go ahead and block it out. But so, since I probably am going to use the blue on this one, so the blue won't be overwhelmed by the pencil very easily, versus like if we were using a lighter color like yellow or potentially orange or even red, like it would be super muddy really easy. But so let's go ahead and start watercoloring this. Alright, so to start painting this, I'm going to try something a little different because I want to test how using a metal palette works. But it's the same process as using the lid to the Prang watercolor palettes. Alright, so what I'm going to do to start with is go ahead and just kind of lay down a good bit of light blue, and I'm going to try to leave the stitching the thread white. And so to get that super light blue, because again, with watercolor, you do want to work from light to dark and kind of let your layers dry in between. So I'm going to grab just a little bit of blue, maybe a little bit more than that, and make sure that there is enough water in there that it is going to be super light. And so if this was a finished piece, I would probably still want to start in a area that is going to be dark, or use a scrap sheet of paper, or just mark it in like the margins here. But so that is fairly light. So I'm gonna go in and just kind of lay it down directly over top of my pencil marks. So again, I'm gonna try to leave the stitching actually white, to kind of let the paper show through there. So I don't know if you can see it or not, but there is a bunch of like little fuzzies in mine. I probably should have actually cleaned this before I started using it, but that's okay. I don't think it will really matter for the finished piece. Alright, so I'm going to let that dry really quickly so that I can have nice blends and kind of control it myself, versus it just kind of going where it pleases when I put more color into this. So this would be a good opportunity if you're working on more than one. So if you're doing this kind of all three fabric pieces together, watercolor works really well for larger pieces and multiple small pieces, because by the time you would kind of do the same step for a second and or a third piece, or working from top to bottom, your top's going to be dry or your first piece is going to be dry. But since I'm going to do each one of these kind of in their separate videos, I basically just kind of need to wait until my paper is dry. Alright, so this looks like it has dried a good bit, as it's a little damp to the touch, which is fine. It doesn't have to be like completely 100% dry. So I will go ahead and kind of add a little bit more pigment to this. And again, I'm going to kind of start in the corner, make sure it's not going to be too dark. And so with this, it's kind of working out, I'm working backwards. Well, not necessarily backwards, but generally with like pencil, you might work from light to dark, or not light to dark, dark to light, and kind of blend it out. Versus this, you are going to kind of start with your shadows and kind of color everything else around them. And so the whole background is it's at least darker than the foreground. So I'm gonna go ahead and kind of lightly color all that in with my slightly darker blue. And then So I'm going to just kind of go in and start to kind of block out some of the areas. So I kind of want that to be a little bit brighter. And then kind of start to fill a lot of this in. And so I am going to also kind of go right up to where those stitches are, so that I do have a kind of a hard outline on them, because I do think that I'm going to try to erase some of the pencil to see how much I can kind of get it to lift, since it is a very harsh outline and it's a little bolder than I wanted it to be. Alright, so there is a bit of a highlight down here, kind of across. And so altogether, I think this will probably take like 5 or 6 different layers to kind of work from light to dark. But so you can kind of see it's already kind of starting to take shape a bit. So I am going to also kind of use kind of just like the side of my brush and kind of only tap like the edge of the brush here to kind of create some soft upward strokes to kind of blend out and make it like kind of feather this edge, although I will also go back and just kind of blend it out with a smaller brush here with some clean water in just a second. Alright, so what I'm going to do with that is grab a smaller brush, make sure it is just clean water, and you can go in and kind of blend some of those edges out so that they're not as harsh. So again, if you do this, you do want to make sure that it's not, like you're not overworking the paper, because it will, depending on the quality, start to pill and kind of come apart. But you can kind of very lightly kind of rub your brush back and forth and move some of that color around. So that your outlines aren't as harsh and it kind of blends in a good bit. You can also use this to kind of pick up color that you have laid down if it is like kind of bled over into where you didn't want it to be, or you kind of want to work with a different color. So it is like having a separate container with just fresh clean water is a really good idea for using watercolor, because it can be helpful in a ton of situations. So I've got a good bit of that kind of blended out, and you can see it's kind of really starting to take shape, and probably about the next layer it's really going to start to pop. But so this top area is not dry yet, so I'll let it dry and come back to it in a few minutes. Alright, so to pick this back up, I've added a little bit of blue, a lot of color to it, so let's go ahead and grab a bit more. Okay, so you could go one step more, or since a lot of this is super light, I'm going to go ahead and stick with this. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of fill in the super dark first, and then so I want to kind of plan out my shadows. So this area here is going to be the lightest, so I kind of want to, I'll use to blend this into that. This is still going to be one area darker, so I can go ahead and color that with this shade of blue. Let's see if that's my super light. This is dark, and actually both of these can go one more shade of blue. Alright, so this here looks like we've got a bit of a shadow there and another layer in there. And then so this can be a little bit darker, and so I'm gonna be a bit more selective of where I put my darks now. So kind of center dark, super dark, like before I'll go in. So first I want this. And so I do force photo softer, kind of, so that that'll stand out a bit. And then just, and actually I'm gonna, again, clean water. Which you can, gonna go almost immediately back into and work with. Because if you really want fine blended edges, it is harder to do that with acrylic, but if you're blending, watercolor is a really good medium. I also do kind of, for me, really quickly, so as much time kind of waiting. Scrolls or like to use watercolor, because actually soft serene kind of on how much you burn it. Quality and brush strokes. And one thing that I will potentially do to watercolor are other options, similar effect down on paper. And I blended that all out. And I think I'm actually going to wait a few minutes, let this dry completely, and I'm going to go ahead and try to erase what I can of the pencil lines. Alright, so to kind of keep working on this, I'm going to add some more blue and see what color we've got. Alright, so that's not going to be much of a difference, so let's add a little bit more. Alright, so what I'm going to do here is kind of go in and kind of add it to those darker areas. And so I'm going to start hitting the areas like here and here. where I want where there's some lighter areas in the background. So I'm going to start to not color those. And then this was super dark. And this down here was darker. And so with this, I also want to go in and just kind of hit the super dark shadows on the soft fabric here. So basically each layer, when working this way, you're going to do a little bit less and less per se. And so we'll just go in and blend those out. So we have a nice smooth gradation, other than there where it is a harder kind of edge. And so I'd say most of the kind of upper fabric is pretty much done, except for where there's like extreme shadows. But so again, it's just kind of playing around, layering and glazing your colors to make them kind of deeper, less watered down, till you get the kind of desired effect that you want. Oh, and I was going to erase, and I didn't do it before I started painting. That's okay. I think it'll be alright. So this last little dollop right here. Alright, so I'm going to let that dry a little bit more, and then we'll come back in and add kind of the final deep dark shadows and kind of finish it up. Alright, so to pick up from here, I'm going to get some more blue and spread in there, and I will go ahead and kind of layer that into my super dark areas. Because I think we'll only need like one more touch up after this. So just kind of lightly dotting it in there. Alright, so I'm going to grab some actual fresh water, since that is getting a little muddy. Alright, so again, I'm just kind of going to blend those out. So I think there will be one more deep blue right there, and maybe down here in this corner. I'll probably add a touch of it right here. Now I am going super detailed into this, but I really kind of like to. But so if you're practicing, like, you don't necessarily need this many layers. But if you are kind of familiar with watercolor and want to just kind of push yourself, this is kind of a good practice to kind of really study lights and darks and get some good practice in. And kind of with most things, the more you practice, the better you'll get. So I did just kind of clean that up and push the darker over onto its own side a little bit there. So what I'm specifically doing, where I'm kind of moving around the cup here, is where it is clear, I can really, or it's white, I can make sure that my brush is mostly clear water instead of having a good tinge of blue. And so I'm going to also kind of lift some of the paint right here and kind of blend that out so that we have that one tiny little highlight back in. Alright, I'm going to let this dry just a little bit more and then add the final finishing touches. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and at this one, go ahead and try to use the eraser some. So I know a lot of it won't erase, and that's fine because it has been gone over with the watercolor, and that's pretty normal to not come up. But so I wanted to show you kind of what, how it kind of doesn't erase a lot of it. But so a good bit did. There are still some like hazy outlines and dotted lines, but it does look pretty good. Alright, so to finish this up, I'm going to get some almost just pure watercolor and kind of place in those super dark areas just a little bit. And then we'll spread that out. And that should finish it up. Alright, and also I'm going to take a good bit of water, steal a little bit of that, and go in and kind of where I erased those lines in between there, and go in and kind of put some of those back with just the blue watercolor, and so that those stitches are kind of still there. Alright, yeah, I think that's gonna look pretty good. Alright, so now just to go in and blend out the last bit, and then I'll call this one pretty much done. Nope, actually I should have added a little bit right there to fade out. Yeah, I think this piece kind of came along really nicely. Other than that, you know, a bit of eraser right there, but that's okay. And I'll just touch up these lines now that it's dried. I can see where like those harsh edges are. And so you can also blend when it's completely dry, kind of like this, and go back in and touch up spots with just water. That does work really well as well. Right, so you can kind of do a mixture of blending it when it's still kind of fresh and blending it once it's actually been dry for a bit. And actually that can be a really good way to go in and kind of fix areas because you're not really sure exactly how it's going to dry a lot of times. You can also play a bit with picking up colors from other areas and kind of going back in with a little bit more detail like this. And then kind of spreading it back out with clean water. So a lot of watercolor painting is, again, just kind of push and pull and kind of move the paint, the pigment where you want it. I'm gonna feather that dark out just a little bit more. That should be good. And then do the same here. And then just kind of blend all this kind of together. Alright guys, I think that will do it for this one. I think that looks pretty good. So again, just when you're working with watercolor, be sure to just kind of be patient with it, work in layers, and I mean, you can always go back in and kind of touch areas up a little bit, so don't kind of worry. Alright, you guys have fun, stay safe, be creative, make some things. See ya.